So let's get started. Today, we are going to talk about overcoming resistance and driving change, right? That's what you all signed up for. So before we get started, what does resistance look like? Let's all get on the same page. And to make it a little fun, I thought we'll start with a few memes. So that might be a resistance that some of you have encountered. You know, this is a great idea, but we've always done it this way. So that is a classic resistance, right? Or, you know, I just didn't have the time. And the meme says, if you can't see it or if it's too small, I had time for 5 back-to-back meetings about efficiency, but no time for efficiency, right? So I'm sure most of us have encountered that sort of resistance, or I would call it more of a hidden resistance. Because, you know, I mean, it's totally socially accepted that you didn't have time to do the thing. But why didn't you have the time? Like, why didn't you make the time, right? So these are the type of resistances that we might encounter or are familiar with. And so we are all in the business of change, right? So why is change important, right? We are being hired to do so. But I think it is very, very important, and not that anyone would ever forget that, but I think it just sometimes steps into the background as we work with organizations and are for the most part, I mean, maybe your type of work is different, but I am not on the ground with the client. I'm not with the constituents. So I only ever see the organization and work with organization leaders, right? So it's easy to actually, you know, not really forget, right? We don't forget, but it steps into the background that what we are actually working with is, or that why we are trying to create change is to make circumstances better for humans, people, kids, the environment, animals. I mean, there are constituents at the end of the day, right? And it's not only that, and that's why I love this this quote so much by Ralph Waldo Emerson. This in the top right is actually a picture of a little memorial thing that I walk by every single day. And every single day I make it a point to stop, even if it's just for a few seconds, to remind myself of that. Like, what is success? Like, what does it mean to have succeeded? And you probably are all familiar with the poem, but it ends with, success is to know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded. And I love that poem because, I mean, there are so many ways in which we can look at success, right? So one life has breathed easier, right? There are the constituents, as we just said, but then there are also the people that we work with. And they hired us because they had some sort of problem and they wanted that problem solved. And therefore, they were even willing to pay you probably a decent amount of money. So that's why change is important, because change is, or, you know, success means that people breathe easier, and that is at the other side of change, right? But we encounter resistance, which we just saw in these few memes that I created for you. So if you now tune out for the rest of this presentation, I want you to remember one thing that is like the main point of this entire presentation, this entire workshop. And that is, the key to implementing change is to focus on friction over fuel. So that is the key point of this framework that I'm going to refer to, which is called friction theory. And it's created by the researchers Lauren Norgren and David Shuntal. And they elaborated on it in this book. It's called The Human Element. Can you all see it? That's The Human Element. I can highly recommend this book. But if you don't have the time to read this book, I'll walk you through this framework so that you can apply it in your day-to-day work. And the feedback I have gotten, I have held this workshop, I think, once or twice before, and talked about this concept with a lot of folks. And the feedback that I've gotten was incredible, really. So the other day I was at a networking meeting with someone else who had attended that workshop. I had totally forgotten that she was even part of it. And she said she's still working with this framework because it was so impactful for her. So that's what I hope for is going to happen for you too, that you're going to take this home and be able to apply it immediately in your work or change your perspective, right? Because, so why key to implementing change? Why is it friction over fuel, right? So they give a story relatively at the beginning of this book, where they talk about how the American Armed Forces had this goal to increase recruitment into the military, right? They wanted to get more people, more, young folks sign up for the military. And what they did was, okay, we need to increase motivation. So they created these billboards and marketing campaigns and threw a lot of money at making it more attractive to join the military. What happened? Not much. And the reason for that was, which they found out later with the help of these researchers, is that the reason that young people were not signing up for the military wasn't necessarily that it wasn't attractive to them. Because it is already pretty attractive, right? You get to pay for college. It can be pretty prestigious depending on how you're looking at the military, and it's pretty well compensated, etc. So the motivation wasn't the problem. The problem, the researchers found out, was that recruitees or potential recruitees had problems explaining to their moms that they were going to change the military. They were afraid of having that conversation, right? So a conversation about death, potentially. And so what these researchers then suggested with success or implemented with the military was a structured program where recruitees can come, or potential recruitees, right, can come with their parents to have this conversation, right? It was basically a format where parents and young people were invited to talk about, what does it mean to join the military, right? So bringing the parents into the frame. So the friction that young people were experiencing was holding them back from joining the military. And once that friction was removed, they saw better success. Or they increased the rate of people signing up for the military. So that is all to say, again, back to the upshot for today. We tend to always focus on motivation, right? So how can we motivate our clients to do the thing we want them to do, to drive the change, right? To embrace the change so that they get to that golden future. But the key to get there is actually looking at the friction, looking at what is holding them back to implement that change. So this is what the workshop is all about. If you choose to sleep through the rest of the presentation, that's fine. Just remember that one key thing. If you decide to stay with me, I'll walk you through that exact framework or that template that you can use to identify the sort of friction that might stand between you and the success or the change that you want to drive. And also some suggestion on how to overcome this friction. Okay, with that said, let's jump into our agenda. So we will first look at, as I just mentioned, the different types of frictions out there. These are 4 main categories of frictions. Then I'll walk you through a little case study where I apply this framework to a real life challenge that I encounter over and over again, and show you how to identify the friction, or what is the specific friction and what are the solutions to overcoming this friction, or what are potential ways to overcome this friction. And then we'll end it with a Q&A and some suggested discussion questions. If you don't have any questions, that is totally fine. Yeah, so we should have plenty of time for the discussion. So, but if you do have any questions in the meantime, don't hesitate to come off mute or to put them in the chat. Okay, so friction is the root of the resistance, is what Hillary asks. Exactly. Friction is at the root of the resistance. Exactly. That is, I might use these words interchangeably: friction, resistance. Okay, thank you for the question. I'm happy to answer any other questions if they pop up throughout the presentation. Alrighty, so let's get started. Oh, I haven't really introduced myself. My name is Anne. I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm one of those members that are not in the greater Chicago area. Sorry, I keep saying, mispronouncing Chicago, sorry. I do have a master's in of public administration with a specific focus on organizational behavior. Problem with that was that I learned a ton really about motivation and employee engagement and all that, but nothing about friction. And in my real life experience as a consultant, helping executives, directors raise more money, I encounter a ton of friction. And if you're even vaguely familiar with fundraising, you will know that fundraising is often associated with a lot of emotional resistance. And that is also going to be part of the case study that I'm going to walk you through later on. So that is my background. And yeah, so let's get started with our agenda. Oh no, let me hear from you. I mean, we are not a lot of, yeah, we are 10 by now. I would love if you could briefly add into the chat what type of change you are creating. So is it implementing a new accounting system? Is it looking at different ways on using data to inform decisions? Is it whatever? You tell me, what sort of change are you creating through your book, or what sort of change do you want your client to go through? So, I mean, it might be that some of you are grant writers, so there is no real change that you're asking your client to do, right? You're writing the grants for them, but chances are that there might be a few organizational or strategy consultants in here, so they are in the business of change, right? So helping organizations be more community-centered, planning, creating, and measuring content holistically. Yeah, I'm a content strategy consulting, causing lots of change in the organization, right? Belinda says, change in my line of work is about clarifying strategic focus. Lydia says, I help nonprofits use branding and marketing design to make a change and express their mission. Brian says, leading an organization through transition from founder-led to new culture. Oh, interesting. Culture change is hard, right? Creating a nonprofit advocacy network to inform other nonprofit leaders the legality of importance for direct services, implement policy work, organizational alignment, stakeholder alignment. I use storytelling with groups, right? Okay, so switching from one way of communicating to a different way of communicating. Awesome. Okay, so now we know, so okay, so now we've got that top of our mind. What is the change we are trying to see with our clients? So how frequently do you encounter resistance in your work? And when does it come up? If you can share maybe some high-level notes how resistance is showing up for you. Do you encounter the resistance of, oh, I didn't have time to do this thing, although we agreed to it? Okay, Brian says regularly. Anyone else? Thoughts on change? Martha says often resistance occurs during board meetings and discussions, right? Financial resistance, they need to know the investment will pay off. Okay. So I've had people literally fall asleep or walk out of the workshop or just not following the guidelines they have theoretically accepted. Wow, Hillary, that is interesting. Gordon says often client is typically the CEO and changes need to occur across the organization. Okay, so we all seem to, leaders want to use intuition. Okay. All right, that's great. So we all agree, we are here in the business of creating change. That's why you signed up, and you encounter resistance relatively frequently. Okay, so what to do about it, or what types of frictions are there? And again, this all goes back to the concept and the ideas in this book. And the researchers identified 4 types of frictions, and I'll walk you through each of them before we get to our case study. So the first friction is reactance. If you have kids, you are probably very familiar with reactance. You want someone to do something, and they say, no, I don't want to do this, only because you told me to. So I haven't chosen to do this myself. And I can see that in boardrooms, or if you have, let's say, or even with staff within an organization, right? So you have your contract and agreement with one person within the organization, the economic buyer, right? And yeah, but then a lot of other people need to come along on that journey, right? To change things, or to make that change happen, but they didn't necessarily sign the contract and are in the full picture of what's actually happening. So that's when reactance happens, right? Or think about your toddler. You want them to get dressed, and they say, no, I'm not getting dressed. But the entire picture is changed when you make it a choice for the toddler, right? So we're getting to that. Reactance, that's the first form of friction or resistance. Hillary, you were asking about that, right? Okay, so the second form of friction is inertia. Here we are coming back to the meme that I showed earlier, right? So we've always done it this way. So we are doing it this way, and it's very hard to change this. And it's just hard also. Inertia, we've always done it this way. Right. This is the third friction, effort. I mean, we signed up for this, but we didn't know it was going to be this hard. So it's just too hard for people to change. And finally, emotion. That's what I mentioned earlier, right? That is a friction that I encounter all the time. This seems a little bit scary. So you're asking me a lot of things. And I'm uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable with, let's say, storytelling, because I don't really know how it works, and I'm worried about failing or whatever, or looking stupid or not getting it right, right? Okay, so these are the 4 frictions. So let's add into the chat, or let's share between these 4 frictions. Which do you encounter most often? Okay, I'm pulling them up again. So thinking about reactance, no, I didn't sign up for this. I'm not going to do it. Inertia, well, we've always done it this way. Let's stick with the old way. It wasn't so bad after all. Effort, this is actually a little harder than expected. This is a lot of stuff. And emotion, that's actually, I'm uncomfortable with that change. Emotion is what Emily says. Emotion is the type of friction she encounters most often. Emotion and inertia, Andrew. Anyone else? Brian says inertia. It's hard for people to imagine a new way of doing things. Yeah, or they don't know how. Yeah, that could be effort, right? Effort and inertia. Okay. So chances are that you might be encountering each of them to various degrees, right? Lydia says inertia for clients and reactance for my kids. Right. You lead our parent resource group, right? So you're an expert on that. Okay, so let's walk through the case study, or where I show you how this framework would apply in real life. And before I do so, I wanted to share with you this little, I'll share it in the chat, this PDF that you can use to assess the type of friction you're encountering. And that's on page 1. So I think you should be able to pull this up without registering, right? So it's called the friction report. And let me know if you can't open it, then never mind. So it's called the friction report. You can download it. And on the first page, it's a worksheet to identify the type of friction that you're encountering. And on the second page are different strategies to counter these frictions. But let's walk through that. I just wanted you to have that so that you can walk through it on your own end, and think through it, because I said, like, I want you to walk away with a very practical tool that you can start using as we log off from this call. All right. So we discussed which frictions we encounter most often. So let's get to the case study before we get to the Q&A. All right. So apply this to your work. Here's the Canvas tool, right? It's a Canvas example challenge. So in all of my engagements, I actually work with boards. So I help executive directors raise more money. And I specifically work with executive directors who don't have fundraising staff. So the board should always play a big role in fundraising, but especially in organizations where there's no fundraising staff and there might not be a culture of philanthropy or fundraising in the first place, the board is absolutely critically important. And I'm sure you all agree that the board is at the root of any sort of culture change, and culture eats strategy for breakfast. So if you want to change anything, you need to get the board involved. So that's the perspective I would like you to adopt as we are walking through this example, which is obviously specific to my work, but I'm sure you can find many similarities and analogies for your own work. So engaging boards in fundraising. So there is oftentimes reactance. Board workshop, we start discussing fundraising. I mean, that's not how I approach it, especially not after I learned about this tool. But what can happen, or what probably happens for a lot of boards, is, oh man, I don't want to do this thing, right? Typical reactance. Only because executive director says I need to fundraise now. But that's actually what I see, for example, when the executive director comes and says, okay, let's install a give-get policy. Everyone on this board, starting at the end of the fiscal year, is expected to raise $5,000 to $10,000 for our organization. So that's when you see reactance, right? I feel forced to do something I don't want to do. So if you look into this tool that I just shared, you will see that one or two of the possible ways to counter this friction is the yes letter, right? So you build a yes letter that comes down to, so we all agree the board needs to get involved in fundraising. So we all agree we need more funds. We all agree, I mean, that is not exactly how I phrase it, but just to walk you through the different steps of a yes letter, and you can read up on how to create yes letters online or in this book that I just showed. We need to fundraise. We need unrestricted funding. We know that fundraising is relationships are important for fundraising. And we also know that every single of these board members is connected to a network, right? And that network consists of individuals, but also, let's say, folks in big corporations who might have corporate responsibility programs, right? So this way you can build a yes letter until it occurs to board members as their own idea, basically, to, well, we need to get involved in this if we really want to make raise more money. Then co-design can be another strategy. So basically asking everyone, so if we need to raise, let's say, or if we wanted to add $150,000 to our budget, how would we go about it? What are the different options that we have? And how might the board get involved in that? And I think that is a really important way to, or very powerful way to avoid reactance, is in giving different options, right? So not everyone, you know, this, I'm not a fan of this everyone gets the same get expectation, right? Because some people might, you know, just never be open to the concept of fundraising, and that is totally fine. But others might just not know how, but they are actually very interested in it. So co-designing a way in which every board member can find a place in fundraising for the organization. And for some, that might only be writing thank you cards. And for others, that might be taking the lead in organizing the annual gala and sending out sponsorship requests to potential corporate sponsors, right? So engaging folks in the way you want to approach the goal that you have lowers reactance. So the toddler example that I gave earlier, right? So toddler doesn't want to eat their breakfast. So okay, so you tell me, what do you want to eat? Or how can we make it fun? Or whatever, you know, co-design the process. That is one way to, or two ways to overcome the reactance friction. Okay, so the next reactance, the next friction that we often encounter is emotion, right? So I'm worried about looking incompetent and being rejected. So I have never fundraised. Many board members, directors are, you know, not involved in nonprofit organizations. So the concept is very foreign to them. Also, you know, if they work in corporations or in a business setting, they might be, you know, what I always hear is, this is a weird concept to me, because if I sell something to someone, then I have a tangible thing, right? It's a transaction, right? Whereas the transaction for fundraising is intangible. I can't touch it. So that is a mindset shift that often needs to happen before fundraising can be successful, because people have never done it before. And they are also worried, you know, so I'm going to ask my friend Bob, or my neighbor, and my neighbor is going to say no. So what is that going to do to our relationship? And, you know, or, you know, it's just making me super uncomfortable. So two ways to address the emotion friction is to normalize feelings. So what you could do, or what I sometimes do, it all depends on the type of board, right? And engagement and all that. But, you know, what you can do, and I have done before, is to normalize feelings. So what comes up if you think about fundraising? What are your biggest fears? And you know, to lower the friction, or to that exercise, I actually do this as a Jamboard exercise, where people can just put their fears or the emotions, whatever they have, anonymously, so that it's not that someone has to raise the hand and say, well, I'm actually really worried about being rejected, or I've never done this before. I have never asked anyone for money, and I'm probably gonna stumble over my own words. So that is one way to do it. And the second way to do it is to build confidence. So how can we build confidence? We can literally accompany people on making the ask, or set very, very small goals, so that confidence is built and people step by step realize, oh, wait, this is actually not that hard, and I had a small success, and I can build on that. So building confidence that this is actually feasible, and that it's actually not that hard. So what is the smallest possible way to approach this? Okay. Another way is also training, right? So there are lots of uh, different emotions around fundraising. But what about if we trained you all to do the thing that you're expected to do? So fundraising training would be another way to build confidence. Okay, so let's go to inertia. So we've never done this before. Why should we do it now? It is related, and oftentimes the next step after reactance. So once you overcame reactance, then inertia. So we've never done this before. So what do we do now? One strategy, and I think I mentioned that as part of overcoming the emotional friction, is to start small. So what is one small thing we can do? For example, send out or let's find someone at a corporation which is known for their corporate sponsorship program. Let's just find a few connections within our board. Does anyone have a connection to, this big law firm or Amazon or whatever, who might help us with sponsoring our gala? So that is one way, in just making the change extremely small. And another way to do it is reframing the entire idea of, in this case, fundraising. So how could we think differently about fundraising? So here, analogies and metaphors work really well. So for example, let's think fundraising is a party. So what if you're not asking your network to support that cause, that's basically excluding them from the party. But I know my neighbors are really invested in environmental protection. I'm on the associate board of an environmental protection organization, and not asking them is basically like excluding them from the party, because they would be excited to support this cause, and in not asking, I'm actually not making them part of the fun. So that could be one way in which you can reframe something, or that's an example of how to use a different frame to address the issue or to overcome inertia. So suddenly it doesn't seem so scary anymore. If we just think about, inviting someone to a party. I mean, of course, I would invite my neighbors to my party, right? Because I like them, and because we have aligned values. Okay, the last friction, but not the least important one, is effort. So this is really difficult. So how can we make it less difficult? One way to do this is to create a roadmap. So if we want to raise $150,000, we want to add $150,000 to our bottom line. That sounds like a lot, and I have no idea how to get there. If I get maybe a 10K sponsorship for our gala, then we are still very far from our $150,000 goal. So what can we do? We can create a roadmap, or we can break down the goal into different sub goals. So let's say we get X amount through corporate sponsors. Within corporate sponsors, we get this and that amount from this and that sponsor, or from 5 sponsors, etc. We are going to do this in January. On February, we are going to focus on sending out our campaign, whatever, right? So creating a roadmap so that the big mountain we are trying to climb suddenly appears, again, toddler example, right? So you want your toddler to walk up that big mountain. They might be like, oh my God, this is too far. But if you focus on one step at a time, right? So let's say, let's walk up to, can you see these rocks over there? Let's walk up there. And then there, and then there, right? So you create a roadmap and break it down so that the big goal doesn't seem as intimidating anymore. The second way to address effort is to streamline behavior. For example, through providing templates, or to take over some of the tasks that busy board directors might not have the time for, right? So with one of my clients, we decided to actually send out the holiday card campaign on their behalf if they wanted to, right? So they didn't have to think about, oh my God, what am I gonna say? Then go to the post office during the busy holiday season, which takes forever. So how can we streamline the behavior? How can we make it easier for people to do the thing that we want them to do? Or something else that I often do is, let's dedicate 1 hour and let's all open our LinkedIn accounts and see who do we know at company X, Y, and Z. So make it easy, right? Don't send people home with this homework only for them to return and say, oh, I didn't have the time, because it was just too complicated and too much effort. So from macro to breaking down the big goal into smaller goals and creating a roadmap, to streamlining the behavior and making it easy for people to do the thing that you want them to do. So we are at the end of this presentation and this part of the presentation. So let's briefly sum it up. The summary, I told you, if you sleep until here, the only thing you have to remember is the key to implementing change is focusing on friction over fuel. And we saw, we are all in the business of change. We are all trying to make people behave differently in one way or another. And we also agreed that, building a yes letter, by the way, that it is pretty hard to achieve that change. We all encounter all sorts of frictions along the way. If we remove the frictions, we can actually get to the goal more easily than previously. Okay, so that's the upshot. What is fuel? Sorry, what did I just say? So fuel. Fuel. Oh, sorry. That would be motivation, right? So, as opposed to, sorry, what is this? Software update. So fuel would be to motivate people, to say, what could we do? What exciting thing could we do with $150,000 added to our budget? How many more people could we serve? So that is adding fuel, right? So let's do it. And that is usually where client engagements start, right? Yeah, everyone is like super thrilled and enthusiastic to do the thing. But then when the rubber hits the road, it's like, oh, this is too hard. Oh man, this is actually scary. Or actually, I'm not sure whether I'm still on board, because we've always done it this way. So fuel would be the shiny, like painting the shiny future, and friction, the resistance, right? So that gets into the way to getting to that shiny future. Okay, so don't focus on the motivation about why they want to change. I mean, obviously we all, I always center around motivation, center around the reason that we are all here, right? I always start any sort of client engagement, especially board meetings, with, why are you on this board? Tell me your one word connection. Tell me, like, what drives you to be here, and what could we do with these $150,000? So that builds the enthusiasm, but it doesn't get us to the goal. Does that answer your question, Hillary? So motivation is absolutely necessary, right? But the obstacles on the way are going to keep us from reaching the goal. And that's why the frictions are so important. But that doesn't mean that we should not talk about the motivation at all.
Right, but what you wrote was focus on friction over fuel. That was why I had that question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So the focus,
I mean, because you still want to focus on the motivation, why they should change, what it will get them, what it will buy them, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So let's say if you do that, so Hillary, you said maybe we'll keep that for the Q&A. Maybe we can walk through.
Sorry, I thought this was the Q&A.
Oh, sorry. No. We are actually at the Q&A, so we can jump into the Q&A. Wait. So Gordon says, I feel like fuel is the knowledge. Just to wrap this up, I feel like fuel is the knowledge that I bring to the client. It doesn't mean they will take advantage to it. Okay, that is also a good way to think about it, right? So I remember in the book they were talking about motivation as the fuel, but I agree, Gordon. the fuel is, yeah, the knowledge that, or you can think of the fuel as the knowledge and the resources and sometimes capacity, capabilities that you bring to the organization, but you need to overcome the friction to, yeah, actually taking advantage of that. So I can offer a client all sorts of things, but if they don't take advantage of it, it's not going to lead to the change. Hilary, is there anything specific, or can you give a specific example, or if you have?
I mean, every single time that I
yeah,
counsel clients on a content strategy, there's a small group who says, yes, we want to do it differently. Yes, we want different results from our content. Yes, we get it that we're creating content in silos, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe the people at the top, or one of the people at the top gets it, but ultimately it's sort of changing people's job description, changing their behavior. And it's a push and pull. So you have to do it and you want to do it. And so, but they don't want to do it. They were perfectly happy not doing it this way. And their job description hasn't changed to tell them they need to do it differently. So they don't want to, they don't have to, you're not the boss of them, so they don't. And so it's really like pulling teeth all the time, pretty much in every project.
Right.
And sometimes, like in the person who, in the organization where one person fell asleep and their colleague left the room in a workshop about audience prioritization, for example, it didn't work. The effort was a failure because I and the particular client I worked with internally couldn't make the kinds of change, organizational change, that this new approach would require.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And that example is pretty drastic, right? So
that was the worst. I've never, ever had that before or since, and hope never to again.
Yes. Okay. Sorry that happened to you. This is really not fun. So let's build on the group. So what do you all think? I mean, after learning about this framework, what would you recommend, Hilary? How do you think, how can we think about this problem that, and what you just described, Hilary, and I want to summarize to make sure that we understand, right? So I think it refers to one of the examples that I gave earlier, right? Where you have the economic buyer or someone deciding that this needs to happen, but then people like on staff that need to come along for the change to happen, they don't necessarily agree with that.
Yep.
So group, everyone here, what are your thoughts?
I had some thoughts on it. I don't have a solution necessarily, but I think one of the challenges in that situation is that everyone might have different friction. And so it's not like there's one, I think as leaders.
Uh-oh. I think we
like
lost
one
Emily.
Or two frictions to focus
Emily,
on.
I think we lost you.
Sorry, can you still see me? Something's going on with my internet. Okay.
Yeah, you said there are different frictions for different people. That's where you started, or that's where we lost you.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking like sometimes with leadership, there might be a clear, group friction, but maybe when you're dealing with a lot of different employees or people at different levels, that you might have to explore different frictions with different people, which sounds very complicated and difficult to do. So I don't know if anyone has encountered those situations.
Anyone else?
Hi, yeah, this is Andrew.
Yeah,
I've encountered the same kind of thing, and it seems like the more people are involved, the bigger the board, the bigger the organization, the more likely it is you're going to find somebody in some other department or some other area who's going to have a totally different mindset and a different resistance or friction. And so, often what I've encountered is I can get the executive director and 2/3 of the board on board with the change, but somebody in some other department is going to fight it tooth and nail. And so then it often comes down to a decision. Well, do we keep that person on with the organization because they're going to destroy it, or do we let them go? And so recently I worked with a big, for me, 150 person nonprofit, and the executive director and the board president were really strong, and they said no, they've got to go because they're just hindering the entire. One person in one department was blocking the entire change that everybody else agreed they needed. So I don't know what the solution is, but that's something I've encountered.
Yeah, similar to what Hillary said, right? Thanks for sharing. Brian?
Well, I think there's also the question of degrees of resistance, because there are some whose just heels are totally dug in. So no matter what, right? Maybe Andrew, this is your point. Like if there's a significant or very divergent change, right? They're just not going to go along. But then you have a group I found that's sometimes in the middle, right? And they're kind of watching which way the wind is blowing. And within that group, oftentimes, I think, they're persuadable. So sometimes I think, depending on the level of change, focusing some energy there to begin to shift the energy in the direction you want it to go. Because sometimes in a board, especially where there's some people who are sit quietly and are sometimes the last to speak up, when they realize they're not alone or there's a critical mass. So part of it, I think, Anna, your idea of starting small, right? There's a progression here. Things don't just flip a switch and the change occurs, right? There's like the political manipulation or the relationship and the trust building that has to happen sometimes on an individual level to begin to shift people. And then sometimes the room can change, and then people say, okay, I am in the minority, and whether it's voluntary or involuntary, they might be out.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So so making the change small. So, does anyone else have a a way or perspective to look at this specific example or these examples where, again, to summarize, right? So what we are dealing with is or what Andrew, Hillary, and Brian said is we have oftentimes in organizations, it's not a uniform, there is no uniform resistance, right? So some people might be on board, some people might not be. And then there are also different types of resistance depending on who you're dealing with. So that's where we are at. And Brian already made some suggestions. So Emily, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I'm sort of like thinking of this framework and applying it back to some of the strategies that I've used, maybe even unknowingly. But I was looking at that, the report, the link that you sent us. And then the emotion one, it says focus on why, become an ethnographer, bring the outside in. And that's really a lot of my work is listening to people's community. And one of the things I've found is maybe even before I hear resistance, my work is listening to people, and then I reflect it back. I pull quotes that kind of tell the story of what we heard. And I find that really helps set people up into a bit of an agreement, because everyone's there for the mission. And often when we listen to people that reflect on how the mission's affecting them or how certain problems maybe are hindering the mission, to hear it from partners, to hear it from the people you serve, to hear it from funders, I think